And it is. Okay. Sorry, folks. Mysteries of this technology. It just collapsed for no apparent reason. Lucas, can you still hear me? I've moved away from my laptop. Can you still hear me?
All good.
All good? Even back over here?
Yep.
Yeah? Oh, good, good. That's great. Okay. We're talking about the significance concept and how it underpins everything. And really, significance can be applied for many different things, but today we're focusing particularly on impact significance. Thank you, Max. So repeat content, you know that we have this notion of a significant proposal in EIA in Western Australia, so that has a special meaning, but it is defined based on the likelihood of a significant effect on the environment. So significant impact is at the core of that. Interestingly, if you look around the world, including in Europe, there's no legal definition provided of significance in most EIA procedures. And that's the case in Europe. There's no clear definition provided. So I just wanted your perspective on this. So Carla passed around a slip of paper to you each before. This is the analog system of Mendy. What is it called? Mentimeter. If you fill out that sentence, that's what I'm interested in. I want you to write on the piece of paper the end of that sentence. An environmental impact is significant when it. What does significance mean to you? What is a significant environmental impact? Just write that down. Environmental impact is significant when it. I'm interested in what you write there. Folks online, like Lucas and so on, if you wouldn't mind sticking your stuff into the chat, does mean you get identified, but sorry about that. Mentimeter ain't working. Sorry, I didn't know that's the talk. Talk in the break. Can you help me collect the papers? If you collect one side, I collect the other and over. So you got 30 seconds left. All right. If you pass your slips, Carla will take that side. I'll take this side. Thank you. Oh, will you? Okay.
I'll bring it to you.
Ready to go? Don't need to fold it. It's okay. It's not a vote. You're still anonymous. Oh, it's being folded. It's like a little voting slip. Oh, more folding. You actually identify yourselves by folding because everyone knows it's yours because it's got the creases on it. Thank you. All right. Done? Good. Now I'm going to give you someone else's definition. Just start handing them out. Someone who's, here we go. Look at that. You fill out one bit of paper, you got another one in return. I do your swap. Right hand, left hand. All right. You ready to go? Come on. Oh, you greedy man. You've got two. Who hasn't got one? Just from this side. You get one of these and one of those and one of those. Look at that. All right. So now you've got someone else's answer in front of you. Would someone like to? That's all right. Just give, everyone got a piece of paper? Did you get one? Oh, she missed out. All right. Okay, sorry. You look at that one. All right, who'd like to share? What have you got? Sir, what have you got? Can you tell me, can you read out in a big voice, what have you got? An environmental impact is significant when it
exceeds the threshold of the accepted limit of emissions.
exceeds a acceptable threshold or limit of emissions. Well, what have you got, sir? Oh, yes, you go. You go. You are ready. An environmental impact is significant when it causes a large effect to nature. What have you got?
When it has notable and significant change to the environment.
When it has a notable and significant change to the environment. So an impact is significant when it is significant. That's not a good definition. What have you got, sir?
And when it addresses an environmental issue of a purpose.
It's significant when it addresses an environmental issue. That means every environmental issue is significant. That's a bad definition. What have you got? When a particular measure is needed. That's a bit ambiguous, but I understand the sentiment. You're probably saying if you need to manage it, it's probably significant. But that's a bit of a circular argument because it's not very clear. All right, what have you got? Or observable detrimental to living beings. So it's significant if it's detrimental to living beings. That's an interesting idea. What have you got? You can read it. Oh, I'm struggling. Wow, that's some interesting handwriting. Okay, we'll leave that one. What have you got? Large effect or seen changes. Okay, so we've got lots of ideas there, lots of good ideas. We've got the idea you might have a threshold if it's a pollution thing. You've got the idea of size, it's a large effect. You've got the idea that maybe if it kills or harms living things, it's significant. And some others there. So that's interesting. And you see our problem already. We don't have it's not like you from your brains pull out an identical phrasing or wording or understanding of significant. And yet I've just said to you, everything in EIA comes back to the significance concept. So what are we talking about? Are we all talking the same thing? Are we talking the same language here? The fundamental thing of EIA is significance, and yet we don't agree on what it is. We don't have a we don't have a legal definition. We don't particularly have a dictionary definition. Well, I haven't resorted to one at this point. I think I've got one on the next slide. What we do know is that significance can be used in different ways. There's the notion in the hard sciences of statistical significance. So something, you're talking about the less than 0.05, is it 0.05%? What's the statistical significance? It's got to be in the above 95% or less than 0.5 or something. Yeah, you're nodding, you know it. That's good. I'm not a statistician. You can have the idea of a standard or classification. So you can have, we in Western Australia, we talk about significant populations or, and various other words. Threatened ecological community. If something's threatened, it's usually significant, or conservation status. We give it a word that is a kind of a name. It's saying, when you say something's got conservation status, it means it's significant. It's got significant conservation values. And it can be a judgment or value. This is not significant. So you've got to be careful how you use the word. A way of thinking about significance is in impact assessment is around understanding the characteristics of an impact, its size, its magnitude, its duration, and so on, and then the value of whatever it is being impacted. Sometimes we don't care about wiping a species out. So there was one definition that was about harming living things. When we harm the coronavirus, we're pretty happy, aren't we? If we like to smash the coronavirus, we'd like to kill that. We wouldn't have compunction about that. But when we talk about killing giant pandas, we go, whoa, hang on, but they're cute and fuzzy and fairy and rare and endangered and symbolic and all the rest of it. So the value is about a human a human value that's attached to a part of the environment about what we want to use this thing for. And then the characterization, the magnitude is about the size or the consequence. If we go to the work of Weston, Weston makes the point that significance of an impact is about the sensitivity of the receiving environment and the scale and size of the project. So that's similar to what I just had on the previous screen, but using different words, not quite the same. But the bits I put in yellow, it will also depend on how and by whom sensitivity is determined. Generally speaking, an environmentalist has a, and perhaps even Indigenous peoples have a higher or lower, if you like, lower threshold for significance than, say, a mining company executive does. You know, someone who's used to smashing things up tends to think that, you know, it's okay to behave like that. And someone who's an environmentalist or has got, you know, connects with nature in a spiritual kind of way is a lot more sensitive about what happens. So who makes the judgment of significance makes a big difference in EIA. But the last sentence I've highlighted there by Weston is a key one. Ultimately, EIA significance is to be judged on a case-by-case basis, and it inevitably relies on professional, political, and intuitive judgment. That's a lot there. Political judgment. You know, things can be politically significant. That make a big difference in what you do. Professional judgment around your knowledge of ecosystems and environments and how they work. And then just simple intuitive. Sometimes you just feel something's not quite right. And often that's an important way in which we understand things. When we were looking at the screening stage last week, we were looking at the European approach, the European Commission approach to doing things. And they actually have a screening checklist. And it's all about, as it says there, the checklist of criteria for evaluating the significance of environmental impacts. So these are prompting questions to think about some of the things that you might use to guide you in judging significance. So how large is the impact? Number 4, will the impact extend over a large area? Number 6, will many people be affected? Number 10, is there a risk that protected sites, areas, features will be affected? So a protected site is a significant place by definition. It's protected. So if you're going to impact on that, probably because it's a significant site, protected site, it probably means that the impact would be considered to be significant. Is there number 11, is there a high probability that the effect will occur? Number 16, will the impact be irreversible? You should be recognizing these things. These things were what we talked about last week when I was presenting to you about impact prediction. What is the desirable qualities of an impact to include in the communication of an impact prediction? Many of those things on that list just come straight from that same thinking. So we're reiterating content here. In Western Australia, we have this list of 12 criteria, but the little preamble's quite useful to read. So this is the Environmental Protection of Western Australia. They say the EPA usually considers significance when deciding whether to assess proposals. The EPA also usually considers significance at most other stages in the EIA. The terms significance, significant impact, and significant effect are not defined in the Environmental Protection Act. Therefore, ordinary or everyday meanings of these terms apply. When considering these terms, the Environmental Protection Authority may have regard to and expects the proponent to have regard to various matters, including, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And some of the things in this list are very similar to what I just showed you in the European checklist. If you look at things like number 4 is extent, intensity, duration, magnitude, geographic footprint of the likely impacts. And number 5 is the resilience of the environment to cope with the change. Many of the things I read out to you on the previous PowerPoint slide from the European Commission were related to the magnitude and the reversibility and the size of the impact. But there's other things there, like number 2 is the values, sensitivity and quality of the environment likely to be impacted. And various other things. Number 9 is about cumulative effects. Number 10 is about holistic impacts. These are concepts I shall return to in future modules in more detail. And look at number 12, public interest about the likely consequences or effect arising. So the idea that if people care more, if more people care, something is likely to be more significant than something that fewer people care about. So that's kind of interesting. And that one is possibly missing from the European list. Now we have an expert in the room called Carla, whose surname is Duarte, and here she is. This is her paper. I always have to quote from her paper when she's in the room, just to really rub it in. This is one of the readings for this module, Carla. So making the point that we need to communicate it coherently. I'll let you tell the story, Carla, when you get your turn. And then the other thing is that, of course, significance changes if we are doing mitigation. So mitigation is a big topic for today, but you do need to realise that if we've reduced the extent of an impact through mitigation, then we've probably done something about its significance rating of the overall effect. So we do need to, at the same time as we're thinking about significance, we need to think about mitigation and the ability that we could mitigate it. And this diagram, which I'll share with you a couple of times today, I think is a very good diagram. This is a diagram that shows you how significance is affected by applying the mitigation hierarchy. So it's quite a complicated diagram when you first look at it, but let's walk through it. The top black bar on this diagram is the sort of evil zone, right? Anything that comes above that bar is clearly very significant and basically very unacceptable. Really nasty sort of things. The bottom bar, the bottom black bar, is the idea of, well, you can't do anything without some impact, but there's this idea that this would be an acceptable kind of impact to live with. And what happens is any project that lands above that top bar, you're just going to say, well, wooga, probably this project should never proceed because it's a disaster. But typically what happens is many impact predictions land in that middle ground. So in that middle ground, there is a significant adverse impact. And then we ask, well, can we do anything to reduce that impact? What can we do to avoid the impact? What can we do to minimize the impact? What can we do to rehabilitate bits that might have been disturbed and so on? And each time we're reducing the level of, its amount of significance, if you like, its weighting. But we still, if we have that in the middle diagram where it says a dotted line, it says significant residual impact. If we have done the best mitigation we have, but we still have what would be considered a significant adverse impact, then the only option we've got left is to look to offsetting to try and counterbalance it. Or otherwise, we're probably saying this project shouldn't go ahead because, what do you want to have a significant adverse impact on the environment? So I'm going to return to this diagram. I think it's a useful diagram. And it's quite a good way to explain it. Another way to explain it is in the context of environmental harm and to use a kind of traffic lights approach. So using different words here, but Leduc et al., they talk about something is minor if it only affects a localized group or individuals within a population. So if it's minor, it's probably small scale. It's that kind of thinking. Something is moderate if it affects a portion of a population and may bring about change. May not threaten the entire integrity of that population, but nevertheless, it's got a big effect. So it's sort of in that medium moderate category. And major is where you're affecting an entire species or population. This is where you're in danger of something becoming extinct, perhaps, or something becoming contaminated beyond ability to restore itself. So that's an interesting way to do it. And then they use this sort of the idea of serious harm, significant harm, detectable harm on the left. Similar, sort of a traffic lights kind of approach. And they've also got the idea in that diagram on the left about limits and thresholds. So it's a little bit like the previous diagram from the EPA. We're sort of two big black bars. You've got this idea of a threshold, initial threshold, which you go into the orange zone. And then you've got that limit. You don't want to ever cross that limit into the red zone, because then you're in real strife at that point. So it's an interesting way of conceptualizing significance. Significance is also a big issue when we talk about cumulative impacts, where we might find that our development project is considered insignificant. However, there is a small impact. And when you combine my insignificant project with 5 other insignificant projects, it could be that the cumulative impact is now in the significant category. That's also a possibility with holistic impacts. And I'll give you an example of holistic impacts. This is a case study from a mining project in Western Australia from a couple of years ago for copper and nickel deposits. And it's in remote bit of country in Western Australia, never been mined before. So this is basically a greenfield site, and going out to look for this, take out this mining of copper and nickel. It would be by 2 big open pits cut from the ground. And when they did their holistic impact assessment, which was to look at all of the different components of the mine taken together, they had some interesting analysis. So just to give you a bit of a heads up, this mining would be, you can see the size of it, clearing about 3,800 hectares of vegetation in a 20,000 hectare area. They were going to be mining below the water table, so there's big issues that come up with hydrology and stuff there. They've got to get rid of the mining waste, and they've got 1.4 million tonnes of waste rock. They've got to put that somewhere. They've also got tailings once they process it, and other things. So in this particular case, they went through all the predicted impacts one by one. One of the predicted impacts was, of course, on flora. You've got to clear this many hectares of land. So how significant is this impact on clearing of flora, for vegetation? And in this instance, they said, well, the ecosystems that this mine's going to occur in are quite extensive. They occupy a large part of the regional landscape. And in a nutshell, as you can see from the diagram and the idea of the traffic lights again, the proponent using traffic lights, they basically concluded that the impact they're going to have on the flora is not significant, because there's nothing that's rare or endangered that's getting smashed. It's these are widespread, well-recognised, well protected or represented habitats. They also looked at 9 other individual factors. So remember, we used the word factors in Western Australia. They looked at things like, noise emissions and dust and impacts on groundwater and so on. So they looked at all these things individually. And when they looked at each of those individual predicted impacts, they said they're not actually significant. But here's the thing, with the holistic one, when you looked at the impact on cultural heritage, so now looking at the indigenous peoples that live there and their important sites, they said that there's no single impact from this mine that would be, adverse for the cultural heritage sites. They are going to protect the sites. They're not going to mine these important sites. But they said that when you take all of the impacts of this mining operation together holistically, it would be significant. There are going to be noise and vibration issues and dust issues and visual impact amenity issues and loss of vegetation, which is part of the character of the cultural area. So they said when you look at this project as a holistic entity, from a cultural heritage point of view, there are some serious concerns. So that's an idea too, that impacts can combine. Individually insignificant impacts can combine with other individually insignificant impacts to become something meaningful and important to be addressed. So that's how they did that. And then just reiterating the point about cumulative impacts, it was said very nicely in 1971, Carla, this is my favourite reference. This is one of my oldest references. This is 1971, Council on Environmental Quality. And note that the United States are brilliant at keeping a record of everything and putting all their documents in the public. And what they've done there is they've scanned the original paper version and put it into a PDF. You can see it's like newspaper that's been left out in the sun. It's gone all yellow. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So because it's such a beautiful thing, I had to show you the original image rather than paraphrase it and write it out. But what it says is also really important. So in 1971, they said this. I read the top blue bit. The statutory clause, major federal actions significantly affecting the quality of the human environment, is to be construed by agencies with a view to the overall cumulative impact of the action proposed and of further actions contemplated. And go down to the next blue bit. They said agencies should bear in mind that the effect of many federal decisions about a project or complex of projects can be individually limited but cumulatively considerable. And the last comment says something similar. So they're basically saying that you can have one project, one mining project on its own that's not significant, but when you combine it with other mining projects and a road construction project and a housing development and whatever, the whole thing can be cumulatively significant. Now, onto that in 1971. That's the earliest use of the word cumulative impact that I'm aware of in the literature. And you know what? I only became aware of that last year when I was at the EIA Centre in Denmark, and I picked up a book on EIA about NEPA that I'd never read before. And I'm skimming this book and they said, oh, the early guidelines. And I went, what guidelines? And I went looking for them, and there they were, hidden in plain sight on the internet. I've been writing about EIA for years and never knew this existed. And there it was. Brilliant. So I love having another academic in the room. So Carla is me in Brazil. She's crazy for EIA like I am. And so it's really good to have her here. And then finally, do proponents typically underestimate the significance of impacts? There is a bit of a tendency for proponents to say, oh, we're going to clear this habitat or destroy this indigenous site or mine below the water table, but don't worry, it's all going to be okay. It's all going to be right. This study was published a couple of years ago and from Peru. And it was suggesting, it was a sort of an empirical analysis of case studies in Peru, and the authors had a way of sort of classifying what different proponents were doing, and they said, looks like proponents underestimate significance. So this is that difference about the point going back to the quote by Weston before. Who is making the judgment of significance? It could be that a mining company has a different perspective to an environmentalist and a different perspective to an Indigenous person, a different perspective to just someone who happens to live in a suburb somewhere and likes a quiet, easy life. So in EIA, we've got to deal with these multiple publics, and we have to find a way of navigating significance when we do so. So I'm going to park it there because I now like to welcome Carla, but there are a couple of assignment 1 topic options that relate to this. So assignment topic option 4, should thresholds for acceptable or unacceptable impact be specified in EIA procedures? One of you, when I asked you for your definition of significance, someone said something is significant when it crosses a threshold. So that's a really good thinking by that person. Should we actually simply define thresholds? We've got the 14 environmental factors for what is the parts of the environment we look at for EIA in Western Australia. Should we go to the next step and actually have defined thresholds for an acceptable impact or significant, non-significant impact, if you like, under that? And that's also what assignment topic 6 is about. Should thresholds for significant impact be quantified? And explain that one. So that's me, Carla. Welcome. If you're able to hold the mic, I think you can wander around. So these green lights mean that the microphone's picking up all around. But yeah. So if you're happy to do that, I'll give you a presentation.
Okay. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carla. I'm from Brazil, from Federal University of São Paulo. Have any one of you have been to São Paulo before? Kind of crazy city. Love it. And I've been teaching EIA for the last 15 years. And as Angus mentioned, I'm really excited about this topic. And significance is, as one of our colleagues says, as the heart of EIA, because it's where you have to put everything you know to judge So it's all your technical knowledge of a team, actually, and you have to organize that knowledge to offer this to a decision-making process. So we are in the really interesting interface in EIA. We are talking to many different specialities and water and biodiversity and social issues, and you have to put everything together, and you have to say, this is relevant, this is important, oh stop, this is really important. So, and then you have an idea from what Angus showed in his slides, that you have many different ways to do it. And what I have to share with you here is just 3 cases. There's just cases, actually, that just very practical cases where I've been involved in the first 2, and the 31 that's different. So a little bit more for you to have references on how to do it, because you'll be challenged, I think, if you're working in EIA, you have this lucky as we have, and you will be challenged to do it in different ways depending on the case you are working. So the first case is the Fundão Dam collapse. No, don't know if you heard about it, but it's the worst case that in the world about the dam collapse in Brazil. And the second
Carla,
is in
we have heard about it here, but we just call it the BHP mining dam collapse.
BHP.
Because BHP being an Australian company, it made news for that. No one knows the name Fundão or whatever. Yeah.
Brazil. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. BHP is half responsible in this case. And then we have the Canadian case. Okay, so I was personally involved in the first 2 of them. They're very different each other. So that paper Angus showed that I published was after the second experience, and what we were looking for was references. How should I say something significant in a robust and well supported way? Technical knowledge. I want to do something really strong and offer the best of the knowledge. So I wrote that paper with this in mind, but I'm not going to talk about the paper. You have to read. I just talk about these experiences. So. Well, this Fundão then collapsed. The BHP then collapsed. So it was in 2015, and we have more than 43 million cubic meters of iron ore tailings released on a river, more than 600 kilometers of a river, and it reached the ocean. And this was half Australian, half Brazilian, actually. So it's 50-50. And we have a village that was right close to this dam that was totally destroyed the very first day. And we have many years later studying and problems with this safeties of dams, discussions. And what happened was the river became red for many months, and problems with water catchment in many cities, and even for indigenous communities who lives close to this area. And every year, during the rainy seasons, the tailing and the sediments that were in the riverbed, the rain was revolving this, and it goes back to water column, and everything was back again. So for 7 years, we had this repeating. It was also this day, this first month. So it's still happening, actually. And we it's feels, sometimes we think, oh, now it's better, but then we have El Nino or something like that in a massive rain, and it's there again. So there's a lot of tailings in the river yet. So that's the case. And what happened in the first case, it was it was interesting because we had a lot of teams working in this case study. So we have some researchers in the first stage and a bunch of researchers in the other stage, researchers on the ocean. We have consultants doing this for the company, researchers doing this for the government, researchers doing this for the civil society organization. So there were multiple assessments happening. And I, as a researcher, I was at university right at that moment. I was hired with a lot of other professors. Everyone in the team was a lecturer, a researcher in their areas. I was responsible for EIA methodology, so I was supposed to design how to define what is significant or not. So that was my role. And we were responsible for one of the assessments, but the one that was using all the other assessments to do our assessment. So that's the context of this this first case. And what stands out in this case? So we had the demand was really technical. You have to tell me if the amount of copper, the amount of iron in the environment is significant or not. And then we have a specialist in benthic communities, and I have no reference. There's no similar amount of iron in any moment of history anywhere else. How can I say if this is significant or not? I have no idea what's going to happen if the population, the community, the genetic transformations that are going to happen. I have no idea. Okay, but the guy was the specialist, so he is the person to say I have no idea. So it's uncertainty. Okay, that's the answer. So, but the consultancies could do that, yes, but we were this team responsible for saying we have no scientific knowledge about this. So there's this tables and a lot of cases like that. So what happened here? Sometimes in scientific literature, we have a reference to say this is beyond the limit of what this population accepts. Sometimes you say we don't have reference, but I think if you do it this in laboratory, we can reproduce this. And then we did this for more than 100 impacts, and was really based on this kind of classification. So you saw major, minor, this kind of thing, but we had to define the severity of impact. So we have different categories here. We have impact severity, we have vulnerability of the component, and then the importance of the component, and then we have significance. So we are following something that IUCN, as you mentioned this publication, something they recommended to be used, and we adopted that. And then for each impact, we have a specialist to say something exactly like that. So this is an example just for you to say. So we have a study before the collapse, exploring malformed fish larvae due to metal contamination, because the region affected was already contaminated. This was tricky because we have a lot of big mining for centuries happening in that area, and we have heavy in this chemical industry also in the region. So there were a lot of other contaminants that were not in the tailing originally, but was revolved because of the tailing collapse. And there was this kind of of challenge here. And then some studies in the area about contamination were there. And have the same group doing the same study using the same methodology after the collapse, and saying we have 10% more of malformed larvae happening. So this is major, this is minor. No, again, and never happened before. And then the specialists set this threshold, so up to 5%, up to 8%, and more than 8%. And it was 10, so it was major. And then this is the high technical solution that you could offer, and for a number of different impacts, for water quality, for fish larvae, and for corals, and for everything else that was in the region, specifically for biodiversity impacts. So that was the demand. Very high technical, the most scientific information that you have. That was this case. So this is what I had to share with you about defining thresholds based on scientific literature and using specialists. So this is what stands out in this case. The second case is related to the same case, the fundamental collapse, but it was in an indigenous land. And it was before the first one. And here is a regular consultancy, but exploring ecosystem services. It's a different way. So those cases are not the regular EAA, the previous, and have the plan, and you were just thinking about the future, something that already happened. Part of the impacts haven't happened yet because something can change yet, and you have to predict some impacts, but the worst already happened. But here we have this situation with indigenous land and ecosystem services. And then we have all this brown area where the tailings were detected, and the indigenous land is right close to the end of the river here. Well, and then we have the same idea that we're exploring. This is in Portuguese, but it's the same idea. You have to judge if the impact, the size of the impact, how important is this change, and then you have to judge the component, the factors, environmental factors happening there. And how we could do this with indigenous people, because they should explain to us how some aspects of our vulnerability, because we're talking about water. That is something very basic for a community that's living in nature. And what was the solution here? We have to talk to communities. So it was more than 30 communities, and they were consulted, and they have to vote. They have to say the change in water was really bad for me and my family because of this and that, because they were suffering the impact. The impact was about what was happening with people. So there's no technical argument here. It's about what changed in their lives. So they are the source of information, and they voted. And it's really hard to find experiences with participative definition of significance, and have to have this conversation with indigenous people to explain what significance was. And they were there and really engaged to participate in these workshops. And they have to explain two things for us. The first one is, do you have alternatives? Because if you were going to catch water, and if this river was the main river for you, do you have other place to collect water? Some families do have, because it's a really big area. I didn't show you, but it was a huge area. Some families had other river to go, others don't, and it was different for some of them. And we have to identify these alternatives that was different for each community, and they have to explain how the impact was important for them. And so for some families, it was few months. Some others have trucks with water pipe. What's the name? Water trucks. Can I say like that? Okay. And then it was different. And actually, after that, we have to include a new impact that was conflicts inside community, because they were struggling because, no, this impact is important, it's significant. No, it's not. It's already gone, because they perceived different, they were compensated differently, and it was an impact by itself. So the mitigation itself was a problem. So in this case, we do have data from field. We also have a technical team expertise, but what stands out here is that we depend on the perception of the community for doing that. And it was we had a lot of trouble with the company to convince them that this was the best method for this case. They were not, but it's just an opinion. It's not an opinion, it's their lives. How they're going to prove that? They don't need to. They don't need to. They just have to declare, and that's it. And it was rejected by many people, and the technical analysis that were geologists, hydrologists, and they simply did not recognize this as a robust result, because they would like to have the other table, the table before. So that's the story that I have to tell about this case. And just something simple about this. We don't have accidents like that, disasters like that, crimes. Some people say environmental crime, but they wanted us to use EIA to solve this problem. And after that, I think I've been watching how this knowledge about judging what is important or not is everywhere. So if you're going to work with sustainability reporting, you have to judge also if the changes are there or not. So I think it's important for you to recognize this kind of thinking, this critical thinking in other kind of situations in environmental analysis. That's something relevant, because it's not pure EIA as you're studying here, but it was applied using all the theoretical bases from EIA. Okay, so those are the two cases that I was involved in. And then the Mackenzie gas project, it was one of my favorite cases in EIA. This is a really old case of natural gas extraction in Mackenzie River Delta in the Northwest Territory in Canada. And they started to discuss this in the 70s. And it's a huge pipeline. A lot of indigenous regions to massive investments, and for an operation that's not that long, from 20 to 30, it's not much. And then we have a really pristine region for this pipeline, this 1,000 kilometers pipeline. Well, what happened here is that this report from the 70s explained the contest, and in the 70s they concluded that they need more time. They need at least 10 years to get a decision because they have to talk to all the indigenous land, and this land should be they require land acquisitions for proceeding, and then the final analysis was let's wait. And then in 2000 they started back and they set terms of reference that were in an advanced form of impact assessment, as Angus and I have been studying, that is sustainability assessment. So it's not about just minimizing impacts. It's not just about doing what you can. It's about generating positive impacts. So what was the idea of this EIA? So we want this pipeline be the region is best with this pipeline than without the pipeline. It's a brilliant idea because you're saying we want your development to improve our region, not to destroy our region. Let's use your efforts to change the region in a good way. So it was written in the terms of reference, and the scoping documents and everything was translated to this end. So defining objectives sometimes seems something really abstract for me, and it's just bullshit for in many documents. But sometimes it's really strong because it changes absolutely the way you're going to conduct something. You're going to decide what's enough or it's not enough. And this case was really interesting for this. And then there were other considerations about respecting traditional populations and broadly participative, should include cumulative impacts, and everything else isn't there. But the sustainability assessment is the most important one. And they have done many reports. And what stands out in this case? How do they assess the significance of impacts? And that's specifically what I'm going to show. There are many interesting things in this case, but I'm just focusing on the significance of impacts. And they finished these studies and they recommended 176 measures to be adopted, not only by the entrepreneur, but also by many city governments in the region. So the tasks were not only for the private capital to do it, but also for the public sector to do it. And they assessed these measures against two scenarios. The first line is without final recommendations. So if you're not following our recommendations, this is a scenario. And the second one is with full recommendations attended. And then something else that is in this graph is the capacity of the pipeline. So it's billion cubic feet per day of gas, and you have one first stage here, 0.83, and then 1.2, and then 1.8. So the faster you explore, the time span is shorter. So what means exploring a region for 20 years or for 30 years or for 40 years, the impacts are going to be different because the scales are different and the economic benefits are different. So they evaluated all this kind of things in this different scenarios. So it's a really different way of, it's really rare finding also significance for different scenarios. Sometimes you have comparison of alternatives, but significance of impacts for all the alternatives, this is really challenging and hard to find. So hopefully if you're in practice, you're going to do something similar because this is the best practice and the best what we can find. Well, and then you have the traffic lights here. What's good, what's another opportunity or risk. So depends, and the red one represent the losses. And then they try to communicate the impacts in a really simple way. They have just 5 impacts in this final report. So I have all the 5 here. First one was cumulative impacts and the biophysical environment. So without final recommendations, it's bad in any capacity scenario. there's no way of this doing good for the environment. But with the recommendations, we can have opportunities of improvement in some situations, and this is detailed in the report for all the scenarios. For the human environment, they have this different analysis. So without penny recommendations, we can have some benefits, but with full recommendations, we can have benefits in this 2 capacity scenarios. So too small is not good too. So medium size demonstrated to be good for humans, for human environment. And then we have equity and impact, cumulative impacts management and preparedness that already have different choices. I think the idea is just for you to understand the method. So we're not going to detail any of this. And also they have an interesting impact about legacy. What society you get after after finishing this mining activity. So what all these non-renewable companies should offer something to society. Something will be there after this development. So what society will get from this? So, and then they have a positive perception with full recommendations attended. So its legacy is it's kind of holistic impact. So what do we get from this after a while? So it's long-term thinking. It's a different way of representing impacts too. So what they are writing here represents a bit of this. The panel concludes that the unavoidable trade-off, so we have losses, but these unavoidable trade-offs resulting from approval of the project with full implementation of the panel's recommendation would be acceptable in the circumstances. So it's honest, you recognize we're going to have some losses, we have trade-offs, but they are acceptable because this and that, because you're going to gain this, you can do this in this way, and this is a really clear result. And the conclusion is really based on this analysis, and they say the panel review of the Mackenzie gas project concludes that there are reasonable grounds for expecting the project would make a positive contribution to sustainability, provided that the panel's recommendations are fully implemented. If the project were permitted to proceed without full recommendations of the panel, its contribution to sustainability would be negative. The panel finds the new alternative continuation of present conditions and trends in the absence of the projects undesirable. So they recognize the trends in the region are unsustainable per se, and the project will be good. So it was super shocking for me when I read about this case. So it's better have the development. Wow, these guys are crazy. I will never say that as an environmental scientist. But it's interesting. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of people involved, many different opinions in there, and that's what they get. So great. If you agree or not agree, or how do you perceive this as a specialist? It's something that I keep revisiting this experience and thinking, what I will say? Should I write this? Should I write something like that? So it is sustainable with my recommendations. Oh, my sustainability is so complex. Well, we have to offer clear results in EIA and say you can proceed, you cannot proceed. So it's challenging. It's something beautiful in our profession. Well, and that was the 3 cases that I have to show you. And my question for you, of all the cases you have seen of these 3, which method for determining significance did you find most interesting, and why? What got your attention? What's acceptable? I think you should discuss what's acceptable or not. It's different from significance too. Or do you have any questions about the cases or comments, anything you have to share? Welcome.
Like when you mentioned indigenous peoples, it's important to kind of talk about vulnerability and as a whole, not only environment. So
yeah, vulnerability is really challenging to include because it's a judgment. Even for technical issues in biodiversity, it's difficult to compare and to say this species is more resilient than the other one, and this one's more vulnerable, and you have to have some parameters and criteria, and everything must be really implemented. the regulators is difficult.
Interesting talking about communities and how the impact could be different in two communities, which then causes issues between those two communities. Seems to be a theme throughout. Certainly in Australia, I've seen similar type of issues where, you know, it just causes friction between communities because they, you know, see one group getting more benefit than another group, and those sort of things. It becomes very hard to deal with, you know, the problem as a sort of solution fits all. It doesn't, never has.
Yeah, managing conflicts in that case, it was challenging, and they are still struggling. They are still doing this. It's been 10 years the case happened, and they are still in justice, and they're still suffering many social effects. About they are, I think, having problems with alcoholism and drugs because they can't fish, they can't swim, they can't teach kids to swim, they can't teach kids to cook because the species are not in there. There's a lot of different, they are affected in many different ways. And some of them just got hired in the city. Others are sad for 10 years, and it's really different. It was a big conflict. Yeah.
Cool. So this last one we're talking about, did political will figure into your assessment? Because that's what it sort of looks like. It's, you've got your communities, you've got the environment. Whereabouts does the political will, because over here it seems to be there is significant challenges with environment, but also with politics as well.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean when you say politics? It's politics from government itself.
So you've got the government itself dictating a lot of the way something will go, not just relying on an environmental assessment or impact. So.
We have an interesting contest because we have government from the state, one state and the other state, and from federal, and the other state that were not that much affected, and they were struggling with each other. And if indigenous impact means more money, they were in favor to indigenous people. Something like that, simple mind, economical mind, and the company, in a way, because of the conflicts in the community, the indigenous people were distracted fighting each other, and for them it was good to some extent. So it was crazy. We heard many things that were not appropriate to put in the report, but we were trying to say you have to stick together and fight a company and not fight each other, and they were trying to do that, but it's not possible. So sometimes the political will was against, sometimes it was in favor, but the indigenous body that was responsible for the study enjoyed the way the report were built and constructed and was in there supporting them, but something that.
So you haven't got a good paragraph for saying something about the government in your assessment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe the McKinsey case is also interesting because at the end of the day, most of the times the industry got its way. So it's nice for you to propose any good outcomes for the sustainable part, because if we didn't, they would just approve. Money is involved. So I think this is a good way of trying to balance it out, the industry and the environment itself. So, interesting case.
So, something that I didn't mention about McKinsey, that it was the final decision. So you can go with the recommendation in this capacity, but the project was not. They did not pursue it because of the price of the gas in the market. It was a 10-year process. Just we don't want it anymore. Let it go. And then the sustainable trends that they predicted without the development. They're in this. But I think there's a lot to discuss about sustainability here. It's difficult for me as a professional. It's super challenging to say something is sustainable or something is. No, but we are the ones that should be able to do that. We should be the ones able to build transitions to better places, and we have to be able to do that. We have to have technical capacity. If you're not believing, who else are going to believe that? So it's good seeing some reports like that. That's not industry doing greenwashing for sure. It's lying. Green wish. I think this is the interesting idea about green wish. It's not the airline, but they're just wanting things that are difficult to reach and they're not going to reach at all. It's just a wish, not a plan.
Any other last comments or questions for Carla?
I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep.
Okay. With the fish larvae, there was some specific percentage numbers there, the magnitude classes. Was that based on previous research of maybe similar species or something else?
Yes, it was, and it is reported. There's a lot of debate because we had a specialist, but it was just one specialist. If you have a council of specialists, they'll be struggling to define the thresholds, and it's scientifically supported, but still open to discussion. There was a group that this guy in the team was specifically specialized in this literature, so he had many papers to discuss, and this was an impact itself that was discussed a lot. That's why I used this as an example. The other was way worse because it was not the specialty specific person, and then he was not that robust. This one was. So we have questions for all.
That's good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Carla. Join me in thanking Carla for coming all the way from Brazil to teach you. All right, let's take a break. Let's resume at 3:10, and we'll complete the rest of this module then.
I got some water.
Okay, good. That's what I like to hear. Yeah. That was the easiest. Enjoyment.
So that's quite high. It's a bit high. Ideally, you do. Not quite so insane to look at. The next step is has some selection criteria. Yeah. And you remind you with nature.
Screening. Yeah, I mean, like on state side, they need a PIA. This like started.
Sorry.
You need to
We've made nature.
I mean, like I got other
So the difference is not
ask them. They
big. It's like the search string.
I only saw 3 of them.
So,
But what about if you use nature?
Ask them. Yeah, I'll let you know once they are.
Got to have open or. That would be good. One of and then you can bring urban.
it'll all be like that. I see.
Like 4, and then other group is 3 people.
Nature positive and one. Yeah, so it should be fewer. It should be fewer than what you had with when you just did nature positive since 2021.
Can I discuss?
So it should be less than must be fewer than that.
General structure.
Because there's plenty of papers that are not about Earth.
That's what I used. Search string. So nature positive.
What happened?
Urban and urban.
The state is one. And
City.
then we have like some.
Yeah, they're all in that.
So
Reasons I just
Yes.
did
what
not
happened?
into the 3
Bad.
so it would be easier.
What happened?
Maybe you can divide it in
Nature positive.
I mean, individual wise.
C or something. Do I have left? About 1 or 2. Yeah.
Environment, I mean,
CT
That is all.
centered approach. Just
That is
the
always
reason.
really bad.
Community. Maybe. But what if you just do that? What does that get?
That's the argument.
Put it into
Principle. I just go
Learn how to clean reason.
future life.
At our point, another mistake. There's also like
You are not
there are thinking that, which is also like the building.
We put native power. Also, and also 3,000 22. But what happens in the other ones? Because you whether science will be last. That means you're only looking at the journal. Had a conversation with the lab.
Maybe it takes 15 years. It's like the environment that you have like so much more.
She did the same self-involvement, right? Like into that, we can teacher first. Only 3 courses. So one thought that I would teach that
Like focus on the science like
was
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
all return the results like
Yeah.
reports. Because it's 10 page. This 10 page will be so if I use the Google Digest score
so speak with monitoring and this class run the same.
give the measure posting and then manually
Yeah, okay. That's another way to do it.
read
Yeah.
roughly 3,000.
I've got to start up.
Yeah, okay. Small is probably high school. Elementary schools. Junior high school. We were in a school where we're not really private, but we have you get a school.
All right, folks. Well, I'm going to move now into the second part of this topic, which is about mitigation and offsetting. Very important topic. And if you think about it, if we're thinking about significant impacts, one way of thinking about a significant impact is that if you're going to bother mitigating it, you're going to put effort into mitigating it, it probably means it's significant. That was one of the logic arguments I used in my early PhD research, actually. I said if someone's put in place a mitigation measure, that probably implies there's something important going on, because mitigation invariably costs money and time. So that was my logic. But what do we mean by mitigation? Well, it's really managing adverse impacts, if you like, for Savage, and the way Gibson put it in 2005, the adequacy of mitigation commitments depends on their likely success in reducing significance of environmental impacts. So sort of a reverse argument, if you like. In Western Australia, we have a mitigation hierarchy, which is defined in our practice guide as strategies to, in order of preference, avoid, minimise, rehabilitate or offset impacts. So we always want to try and avoid things if possible, but if you can't avoid them, then you do what your best to minimise them. And even if you've minimised, you've still got impact. So what are your opportunities to restore or rehabilitate afterwards? And it's very common in development projects that the construction phase of a project causes some impact that can be rehabilitated later on. Think about building a road or a highway or a railway. When you can't just build the road, to build a road, you've got to bring in a lot of machinery in, a lot of soil and dirt and stuff to clear and to play with, and you actually have a bigger impact than just the road. But once the road's finished, you can then restore some of that disturbed area and have plants and things come back. Same with if you're making a water pipeline or a gas pipeline. Pipelines are usually buried in the ground for safety, and so they can't be, they don't get in the way. And then if you've buried a pipeline, then you can put vegetation back over the top of it, or at least over much of it, much of the area you've had to disturb. So often construction has a bigger footprint of impact than the operation phase of a development, depending on what it is. And so rehabilitation becomes important. Likewise, of course, with mining, if you can restore a mine site once the mining's finished, then there'd be a rehabilitation going on there. And offsetting is then the last resort, and it's about compensatory measures for what is left over from the other things. I'm going to explain these things in a bit more detail as we go, a bit further on. The idea of mitigation should be a continuous thing, really. You should always be thinking about how can we do better? How can we do better? And it could be that a company that's been operating a project for a number of years still comes up with a better way of managing something and implements new measures. And that's good. So we do want that continual improvement idea. And also in terms of the EIA process, we might have some ideas about mitigation at the screening stage. We might come up with some new ideas during the scoping or impact prediction stage. And we might come up with some further ideas from public consultation later on, and so on. So the point is that we never stop thinking about mitigation, even as we're assessing something. This paper by Dvorkova et al. From 2024 about the road ecology criteria, this was about the idea that you've got to translate or transfer mitigation design elements from one part of a project to another, particularly a case if you change your proponents or something changes over time, the development phase from the construction phase into the operation phase. That idea of transferring management responsibility and controls is an important one. Underneath the EIA is the polluter pays principle. This is a principle in international law. And the idea is that if you cause pollution, you should pay for fixing it up. So in the case that Carla shared with you, the Fundale dam collapse, tailings dam, BHP and Vale mining companies in Brazil, they had to clean it up. They caused this problem. They had to clean it up. And that philosophy underpins the idea of EIA. A proponent is going to make money from their development. That's what they're doing. They're causing adverse environmental impact. Therefore, they should be the ones who pay for the mitigation measures to sort it out. But you do get this idea of cost, because if it's very expensive to mitigate environmental impacts, proponents will inevitably at some point say, well, this is too expensive. And this is essentially the argument with climate change. We've got this idea of carbon capture and storage, but it's a bit of a myth at the moment, because in reality to do it takes more energy and cost than it does to produce carbon in the first instance, as far as I can tell. So we don't get anywhere with it. It's not the technology and the means of mitigating an impact have to actually be economically feasible to be part of what's going on. So this is one of our considerations. We can probably always dream up some plausible mitigation measure, but it may not be economically feasible. So we need to factor that into our thinking. The very original mitigation hierarchy was this one from 1978 in the United States. And I know it's old-fashioned and it's out of date, but I include it because it actually uses some good language, which I'm not sure we've fully improved, at least not here in Western Australia. So we had avoid, minimise, rectify and reduce. They're all pretty straightforward. But we had as the final one compensating. Compensating is different from offsetting. So we have this idea of offsetting now, but compensating is a bit different. And compensating is about replacing or providing a substitute. And compensating can be offsetting, but there are aspects of compensating that are not offsetting. That's the confusing thing. This is the mitigation hierarchy we use in Western Australia presently for the 4 of avoid, minimise, rehabilitate, offset. So avoid something altogether. Minimise is limiting the degree or magnitude. Rehabilitation is repairing it, and offsetting is delivering a compensatory environmental benefits elsewhere to offset the project's adverse impacts. Now, if we're doing offsets, we've got a couple of things going on. So I've got some definitions here or explanations. One's from a paper I'm a co-author of, when is an offset not an offset? And the other one is from BBOP, which is the Business and Biodiversity Offset Program. And they have done a lot of work internationally on developing principles for offsetting. So we said in this top quote, we said offsets seek to compensate for impacts on the development site in another place that is outside the development envelope, and therefore there can be no real confusion between offsets and other steps in the mitigation hierarchy. I don't like our current hierarchy in Western Australia. I think it's wrong, and I've told the EPA this, because to me, mitigation is what you do at the development site, and offsetting by definition occurs somewhere else. So all the things you do in mitigation are about reducing the impact of development at the development site. And offsets, as rightly said on the previous slide and the one before it, is about a compensatory environmental benefit. And by definition, a compensation is a substitute. It's not the same thing. It's not a direct swap. And so it actually occurs somewhere else, essentially. BBOP described offsetting as measures taken to compensate for any residual significant adverse impacts that cannot be avoided, minimised or rehabilitated in order to achieve no net loss or net gain. So again, they don't go quite as far as I do, but they imply it, that mitigation is what you do at the development site to avoid, minimise or rehabilitate or restore an impact, and then you put in place some sort of compensation alongside that. But they do include the idea of net gain, no net loss or net gain. So that's an important inclusion. So just to explain this, when you have an offset and you're doing an environmental impact assessment, you actually need to have 2 assessment processes. You need to have an assessment process that operates at the development site. At the development site, you're doing mitigation. And so you're asking the question, what can be avoided? What can be minimised? What can be restored following the impact? And your assessment is based on this question: will there be a significant residual impact at the development site once we've done all this mitigation? If the answer is yes, there will be a significant adverse impact, then you should probably think about doing an offset, because otherwise you've got a problem. We've got a significant adverse impact. Bad news, right? Bad for the environment. There's net loss if you do that. So what is an offset? Well, an offset's somewhere else by definition. It's not at the development site, it's somewhere else. So now we need to turn our attention to a piece of land or whatever somewhere else. And now we've got to do all the EIA we did at the development site all over again. What's at this development site? What's the characteristic of this site? And then what are its environmental values, who lives nearby, et cetera, and then ask the question, well, what are we going to do there? What is it we're going to do? We're going to try to restore or do something to this environment that's going to offset what we're doing at our development site. And so you assess the size, the quality of the offset, you look at the measures you're doing, you look at the outcomes that you're going to achieve at this offset site relative to your impacts at the development site. And your test question is, will the offset enable no net loss or a net gain to be accomplished? If the answer to that is yes, then you've probably got a pretty good development undertaking. If we go back to Carla's example of Mackenzie Gas, when they did the assessment of the biophysical impacts, it was a negative. Putting in the gas pipeline was going to be a negative for plants, animals, ecosystems. But when you look at the whole sustainability picture, it was going to be good for local people and good for other things, because there were going to be these sustainability outcomes. What was happening there was that there was actually a trade-off of the ecology for a bunch of other benefits that are happening. And we do need to have, in a good EIA, we need to have that transparency and that clarity about what's actually happening before we can start making judgments of something's not significant or something's acceptable and so on. So there are, BBOP have developed principles for offsets. The number one is adhering the mitigation hierarchy. Number two is really important. It's the idea that there might be limits to what can be offset. There might be things that are kind of sacred cows, if you like, things that you really shouldn't impact because they're so rare, threatened, important, whatever it might be, that nothing you could do could actually offset that. So you should just leave those things alone. That's an important principle. There's landscape context, looking at the big picture. There's the principle 4 is no net loss. We should make sure we don't lose environment overall from this. We should come out as either neutral or positive in favour of the environment. Number 5 is about that positive stuff. What are the other additional conservation outcomes? Maybe there's other benefits you can achieve from this. It might be scientific knowledge. It might be something else. Stakeholder participation, you should involve communities in what's going on. Equity, it should be done in an equitable manner so that you don't, local people don't lose for the gain for someone else, or Indigenous people don't get silenced in the process, that kind of thing. There should be a long-term outcome. We should be thinking long-term with biodiversity. We don't want to have just a short gain. We need to, if we're going to put an offset site aside, it needs to be permanent and for forever, basically. Otherwise, we're in trouble. It needs to be transparent, and it needs to be based on good knowledge, which is a mixture of science and traditional knowledge. So let's go back to the net benefit idea, the environmental benefit. This diagram I'm sharing with you was actually used by the Environmental Protection Authority in Western Australia for a short period of time. It was in a draft document they put out for public consultation. Guess what? It wasn't loved. It wasn't loved. There was a sector of our community that didn't love it. I imagine you can guess which sector that might be. It wasn't the conservation group, is my hint. But this was the idea that we should actually aspire to a net benefit. And this was in the era when we were talking sustainability in Western Australia, and we were talking about doing good. We don't do that anymore. We just simply, in 2014, talk about deliver long-term environmental benefits. That's very fluffy, if you ask me. No net loss is and net gain are very, very much more leading to quantifiable and very definitive sort of outcomes. According to the translation of the English translation of various EIA documents from China, a student provided these documents to me last year. It seems as though the goal in EIA in China is actually for ecological improvement, if that translation is correct. So that's a positive. If we are going to apply mitigation hierarchy to get net biodiversity gain, we're doing something similar. These diagrams from Martin Maron, who's written a lot about this topic. But all of these diagrams lead to the conclusion that to get a net gain, there's got to be something big and substantial, often and well beyond the project to actually deliver that net gain. You can only do so much mitigation at the development site. You can only do so much offsetting. You still need something more. You need something that extends into regional thinking and developing the gains. And I'll just, and then let's not forget also that EIA should probably deliver social benefits. Offset should deliver social benefits as well. So we talk a lot about biodiversity offsets, but what about the social elements of environmental impact assessment? What about delivering good outcomes? But as I've put there in red, we do need to be careful of trade-offs, because this article in the bottom there by Albert et al. Uses some case studies of mining in very sensitive environments in southern Africa, national parks and so on, where the argument is used that although the mine's going to trash this ecosystem, the net benefit is for is a net sustainability benefit, because people have jobs and security, and the economics of the country grows and so on. So we do have to be careful when we talk about social benefits that we're not somehow simply trading off environmental impact for social gain. So I just do caution you on that one. We'll get back to trade-offs a bit later on, the next topic. And then returning to this diagram is similar to those ones I showed you from Maron, this idea that it's just expressed in a different way. You've seen this diagram now today you've seen this diagram expressed in 3 or 4 different ways, all saying the same thing. This idea that mitigation is a progressive thing where you try to really reduce the significance of an impact, but offsetting becomes the final opportunity to turn something into an acceptable impact by counterbalancing the significant residual impact. Let me explain a bit further with this hypothetical example. So this is a theoretical scenario for delivering net gain or no net loss. No net loss is the minimum, and aspiring for net gain. So we've got this, it's a biodiversity example. We've got this idea of a species or a habitat, the green zone. Every species, every ecosystem is finite in its extent. It occurs in a finite place in its natural setting. So this is our finite mapping of this particular species or this particular ecosystem. And of course, humans have been around for a long time, so there's already been impacts on that. The brown areas are the areas that have already been impacted. There's cities there, there's roads, there's bits of farmland that have been partly cleared and all sorts of things. Okay, so there's development there, and we've lost some of this biodiversity already. Now we've got a mining example. Proponents obtained a mining lease. That's the square, the rectangle on the left in red, and they found lithium or whatever it is they want to mine, and they've said, okay, this is our site. You can see it's like a pristine site, a greenfield site. It's an undeveloped site. It's a piece of well intact ecosystem or biodiversity. Okay, if they said, well, there is lithium here and we've got this tenement. So one hypothetical scenario is that we can mine the whole thing. We just mine everything, 100% gone. Well, in that case, you just got 100%, your prediction would be 100% impact loss, and probably that would be unacceptable, assuming that this habitat's important. Of course, we start moving in on the mitigation hierarchy. You don't mine absolutely everything in a mining tenement. What do you mine? Well, you might say, well, actually the ore is concentrated in this body in the middle, so maybe we just mine all of that. And that's we can avoid mining the rest by just setting that part of the land aside, and we'd only have any development of this mine would only take place in this designated envelope. So if we were to clear that entire envelope, this is the predicted impact. We've already reduced it a bit. But we can go further. We can say, well, actually, we don't need to mine even all of that. What's really going to be lost forever is this void in the middle, and there's other bits that we're not going to develop so much, and so it actually is a smaller footprint. So we've gone from avoid to minimize, and now minimize, we're talking about the designated footprint. So we've gone from the development envelope to the idea of the development footprint, which will be the only place where development takes place on this site. And then mining's not forever. There are certain areas like the employees' car park and the place where the managers, the mining buildings were. When the mine finishes, all that will be taken away and you can restore that. There might be waste rock dumps that can be put topsoil on and rehabilitated and so on. So when you walk away from this mine after 30 years of mining, when it's all finished, there are some restoration things you can do. So into the future, we will have minimized that impact even further through restoration. But the big black void, the big open pit, there's nothing you can do about that. That's going to be there forever. Once you've mined it, it's going to be there forever. So we've got a residual impact. Now, we said we're going for no net loss. So therefore, by definition, that residual impact is significant, and we need to counterbalance that somehow. And we're now in the area of offsets. And so offset has to be somewhere else. So the very first thing the mining company does is go, well, where can I find a piece of available land that I can use as an offset? And there's a piece of land over to the right. You can see it's a light green area. Now, the significance of the light green area is that it's not been completely trashed, but it is not in perfect condition. They are mining an area that's pristine. It's greenfield. It's in very high quality ecosystem. And that means the offset has to be something that's not high quality ecosystem. It has to be something that they're going to restore and bring back into a high quality ecosystem as a compensation. Otherwise, if you think it through, they haven't actually delivered on no net loss. And because this area is partly degraded already and they've got to restore it, it's all going to take a bit of time, this area is going to have to be larger than the original mine site. What are the chances of them being able to restore something perfectly? If you've got an area of forest that's been damaged or mined or logged or something in the past, you're restoring a habitat. The chances that humans can restore it perfectly are virtually nil. Or if you give it enough time, like 500 years, maybe. So you're probably going to have a bigger area. So the mining company's got to find and purchase a bigger piece of land than the area that they're going to mine. You can imagine that's going to be expensive, assuming it's available. And then the proponent has to fund the restoration of that site. And if they're going to deliver the compensation, if you like. So if we're going to talk net gain, not just no net loss, then they're probably talking about quite a significantly larger offset site than you have impact site to make this happen. And you've got to do some calculations based on that. There's still one problem that's left, and that's the time lag. When you go and mine the lithium, you do it now. You send the bulldozers in and you clear the vegetation now. It takes a matter of a couple of weeks and it's all gone. To restore the offset site, you've got to go and collect seed, you've got to go control weeds, you've got to control feral animals, you've got to grow the seed, plant the plants. It's going to take years. And if you have to wait, if you're talking about replacing black cockatoo breeding habitat, you're talking 300 years for trees to grow big enough to have natural hollows in them that the cockatoos would breed in. Yes, you could do temporary artificial measures like breeding boxes and things until then. But if you've got beautiful, pristine trees, nesting trees that are coming down, and you're offsetting those, you've got to have a 300-year plan to put those to get those breeding hollows back. So there's a time lag issue with it, and this is what the big problem becomes. That this is my problem with sustainability. And you said it before, Carla, that it's really hard to assess the sustainability of something. Sustainability never happens here and never happens now. We can never say something's sustainable. Sustainability is always somewhere else, far away. It's over the horizon. It's the next generation, or it's over there. And certainly in offsets, it's going to be into the future because you're talking about a restoration process. And so we do have this challenge with what we're doing. We talk about no net loss, but if we've got EIA on a greenfield site, we have got net loss until the time lag problem is overcome, however long that takes. The only way you can have net gain easily is if you've got development on a brownfield site. If instead of mining a pristine area, the mining company had discovered minerals underneath one of those brown areas that have already been disrupted and destroyed, and they were mining there, and then they were also restoring those habitats there, you could actually have net gains sort of almost immediately. But what are the chances of only developing on brownfield sites? So that's one of the things to think about. And this is why we need to understand a lot about our baseline environment. because we need to know about its quality and what's going on to make these sorts of judgments. So just to summarize some of these things, if we're talking about environmental impact assessment, approval conditions and offsets on a greenfield site, you've got to have offsets to counterbalance the impacts on the proponent's development site, but you are going to have biodiversity loss in the short term because of the time lag. There's always the possibility that not all biodiversity impacts can be offset. There are some things that can't be offset. Most developers assume that offsets give them a free pass to do whatever they like, and it's okay. And that's not the case. Offsets are only possible if there is degraded land available to purchase or secure in order to act as an offset site. Often we do run out of land. There's no land available in the Perth metropolitan area, for example, for some of the habitats that occur in this area. There's no land available in the Pilbara mining region of Western Australia. That's where our iron ore is, massive iron ore is happening, iron ore mining. So there is a challenge where there is not availability of land that you can actually use as an offset. And you also need some very good accounting to demonstrate that the impacts you're causing have actually been offset, that your restoration of this degraded piece of land has got measurable, quantifiable, performance indicators that show that the biodiversity is coming back. And it does need to be linked back, line of sight, as we said, line of sight between the offset and the development. So we go, this piece of land is an offset for that mine. Let's not forget that. You can't double dip. You can't use it as an offset for something else in the future. It is set up to be permanently protected for that. We also said in that paper that spending money, paying money into a fund and doing research are not offsets because they're not actually restoring biodiversity. They might be doing good things for the environment somehow, somewhere, but they're not actually restoring and offsetting the biodiversity. Okay, so we're not alone in having this view. The Australian government acknowledged that current offset arrangements in Australia are failing to prevent environmental decline, and they made a commitment to reform offset arrangements in EIA, and they called their initiative Nature Positive Plan. They said, we're going to be more into nature positive. And essentially what we're saying is that in all of this, traditional project EIA on its own is very unlikely to deliver net gain. Very, very unlikely. Principally because of the time lag problem, but some other issues as well. And really, you only get net gain if something else beyond the project, beyond what the developer, the proponent can do is happening. And that's really whole of government, somehow government or whole of region approach, some sort of initiative, some sort of additional conservation and restoration activities on a regional scale is needed if we're going to actually deliver no net loss. This has been acknowledged by the EPA of Western Australia. They said this for the Alkimos seawater desalination plant, which incidentally was on the news last night. The construction's just starting on the desal plant, the offshore parts. They pointed out in this EIA a couple of years ago, the EPA said, the declining availability of suitable land that provides high quality habitat for offsets, together with increasingly fragmented ecosystems on the Swan Coastal Plain, means that the piecemeal acquisition of land as offsets for individual proposals is unlikely to be a sustainable regional strategy. And the other bit in yellow, in light of the above, the EPA reiterates the need for a regional environmental protection framework that considers cumulative effects and includes strategic restoration and enhancement. And they then committed to develop a position statement on this, and they did. They published it in December 2024, I think it was. And they basically said, well, we actually need, when we talk about offsetting, we need some sort of regional scale way of thinking about this and doing it. In other words, project EIA on its own is not going to deliver net benefit, is what they're saying. And they're talking about how to do that. The sad thing is governments don't like spending money on conservation. Do they like spending money on conservation in Brazil, Carla?
Region.
For
Region that it comes.
yeah, okay.
No organization.
Yeah, so we don't like spending money on conservation. We like it when private companies spend money, and that's what offsets is. That's private companies spending money, but they're not delivering no net loss. And let's not kid ourselves. So that's where we sit. I've been an advocate for sustainability thinking for a long time. I've been talking to you about this a lot, and asking the question, well, can we actually get EIA to enhance the environment? And it is very, very hard. There's other people like Gibson who've been saying it for a long time as well. And Gibson was behind the Mackenzie gas pipeline story that Carla was telling before. But I have advocated a mindset change. You know, when we talk about the mitigation hierarchy, we never talk about growing the environment. We talk about offsetting as though it's going to magically eliminate impacts. And I've just showed you that in theory it can't. But why don't we start on the front foot, like the Mackenzie gas pipeline story, about coming out with the idea that we will do positive change right from the outset, rather than just focusing on mitigating the negative things. So we did talk about that back then. And then there's been other people who've been saying this now since then. So the United Nations, UNEP picked it up for a while there. They various people have altered the mitigation hierarchy to put enhance on top. So you've got some examples there. Top left is an IAIA, 5 things to do, important things to know about impact assessment. Bottom left is the UNEP from 2014. They were asking, why don't we put enhance on top? Top right, Kornov from Denmark, the group's from Denmark, and they were talking about how we should be talking about enhancement as well. And bottom right, Fisher at Co was talking about strategic environmental assessment, saying enhancing positive outcomes should be our #1 goal. So trying to get that mindset change. We did have one proponent here in Western Australia who did try this. It was quite a long time ago now, 2003 or something like that, 2006. They actually said, we will try and use a sustainability approach to our EIA. We will not just mitigate the negative things, but we will actually try and enhance things. So they actually made a commitment to enhancement actions. And so they actually had a table in their document. This is a proponent, it was the Water Corporation of Western Australia, and they said, these are the things we'll do to mitigate adverse impact. These are the things we'll do to enhance positive impact. So I provide this example to show it can be done. This is not just fiction. This can be more than, this can be actual reality. And in the global context, we have the paradigm of nature positive. And at this point, I should ask Rand to speak to us. This is your passion. Tell us what nature positive is, Rand. Come on. Come on. Not today. Okay. Rand's research, which I'm one of his supervisors. Rand's trying to research. He's researching nature positive in urban settings. So what can we do to actually deliver a return of nature in built areas? But internationally, the whole paradigm is about shifting to actually improving nature. So we do actually have this nature positive goal of by 2030 reversing the decline of biodiversity and having actual improvement of ecosystems worldwide going on. And there have been a whole series internationally, a whole series of guides and practice thinking about it. One of the most positive is from the United Kingdom. They do EIA through their town. Well, they do EIA differently to many other places. One of the principal ways they do EIA is through their town planning and development. What is it called? Town planning. What's the name of the act there? Town planning. What's it called? Town and Country Planning Act. They do a lot of their EIAs through planning, And a couple of years ago, they amended their legislation to say that all new development proposals must demonstrate a 10% biodiversity gain. Interesting. They named it, put a quantified target on it, and they said, you know, everything that gets assessed under planning legislation has to do that. And that's pretty much every kind of development. So that was interesting. It includes the idea of offsetting as a way to achieve that, but it's there. It's interesting to do that. And there's other international people in impact assessment looking at case studies of good practice and ideas of best practice and how to do this. So there is a growing movement of people saying this is what we should strive for. And that's why I want you to think in those terms, because if you go and work in Western Australia right now, no one's really talking about it, but they probably should be, because we're in a state of a lot of decline. So I'm putting it out there for you. Just finish with an example. This was an interesting example from some years ago. What year was it? It was about 2008, I think it was. Interesting use of offsets to achieve a pretty good outcome relative to what would otherwise likely have been the case. So it's got a long name: construction of warehouse and transport depot on lot 46 Tomar Road, Welshpool, and the permanent environmental offset of protecting 21.2 hectares of significant wetland and native vegetation at lot 23 Iopolo Road, Chittering. So what this was about, and I showed you this example in week 1, but I didn't give you the whole story. This was a site that zoned for industrial purposes, just about 2 or 3 hectares in size. And the proponent bought it. The proponent is a trucking company. It's a transport company, trucks goods around the state. And they just wanted to put a depot on it. And you can see that the site's been highly modified. It's also hasn't really got much future. It's beside a railway and a big road. It's in an industrial area. And it's pretty much in a pretty unlikely state to exist into the future as a piece of biodiversity. So I think if the proponent had said, look, you know, I just want to develop this site, they probably would have got away with it. But they had a consultant working for them, and if I understand correctly, this is as the story was told to me, the consultant who worked for them said, yeah, you know, you should really offset the impacts of this, and sort of promoted good behaviour with them, good practice. And they convinced the proponent to go and find an offset site, and they found one up in Chittering, and it's next to an existing nature reserve. There was a piece of partly degraded wetland next to a nature reserve, and they said, why don't you buy that piece of land and restore it and give it over and join it up to the nature reserve, and that will be your offset for what you're doing in Welshpool. And the proponent actually agreed to that. Now, the trick is the offset site's quite a long way away, as you can see, but the significance of it is that it's almost in a due north line from where the development site is. As you move from the Indian Ocean inland, Perth is a series of sand dunes, old sand dune systems, and there are wetlands. You're aware that there's various wetlands as you drive across Perth metropolitan area. You see lakes and things everywhere. And the ecological characteristics of those wetlands is determined by how far from the ocean they are, which is actually about how old they are, because we've had sea level rise over various stages of the last 10,000 years. And so they've actually found, even though it's quite far away, they've actually found an ecologically equivalent habitat because of its distance from the ocean. Not exactly the same species, but it's got a very similar ecological function. So what they did was they said, well, we purchased this piece of land, we'll get the cattle off it, we'll fence it, we'll restore the vegetation on those areas that have been munched by the cattle and cleared in the past, and we will add this to the nature reserve next door. And you can see that the drainage, you can see from the aerial photograph that the wetland system's connected to that nature reserve next door. So it's a good thing for the nature reserve to have this extra thing. So this is an example, quite an old example, but I think it's an example where you probably did get a better environmental outcome than if you just smashed ahead with business as usual. So it's that kind of thinking is what we're looking for.
It is that's an area right now.
The existing, so you've got the Lake Chandala Nature Reserve is that big sort of rectangular area, and the offset site is the 21 hectares on the side. But you can see that the lake is sort of connected, so it's a lake there, and that wetland system includes onto the private land that is the offset site.
It was legally defined as an area that is protected area.
No, it wasn't. It was private land with cows running on it. It was.
So if it got changed to buying, they can do something.
No. The proponent bought the land, restored it, and turned it into a nature reserve. Gave it to the government.
Okay.
And added it to the nature reserve.
It eventually gets invested in the government through the land system.
So it can never be used for cattle or farming or whatever again. So it's permanent in that regard. So a good outcome in that sense. Finally, then, what about the social impacts of biodiversity offsetting? So in examples like this one, we've had a lot of offsets where they've been 30 or 40 kilometres away from urban bushland. So we've had development of urban bushland near where people are living, and we've had an offset 20 or 30 kilometres away. And guess what? People who live nearby don't like it. They go, but this was my piece of bush. This is where I used to go walking in the afternoon. This is where I get my spiritual solace from looking at the birds and the trees. And now it's apartment buildings or a factory or whatever it is. And so we've given a lot of attention to biodiversity offsetting, and we haven't thought much about the social impacts of that. And there's been a few papers, including one from Perth, about the one on the top left, this Kalliolevo, a guy from Finland or somewhere came to Perth and did this study of 100 and something offset sites in Western Australia and looked at 158 projects. And they looked at 158 projects that had gone through EIA and had offsets, and they looked at the social issues associated with those, and they found that people weren't very happy to lose their patch of urban bush. So this might be something for you, Rand, to look at about the relationship of people in a city with nature, and how does that play a role in working out offsetting and the social aspects of it. And there's been the other papers on the right are international studies from different parts of the world, but they are also looking at noticing that there's often a negative social aspect associated with biodiversity offsetting. Something to think about. So I'm going to park it there. Over to you from here on mitigation and offsets. Mitigation is pretty straightforward, still complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. Offsetting is complicated, and it's difficult, and it's also controversial. Some people hate offsets. Some people love them and think they're fine. And you need to figure this out for yourself and work it out. Daniel's got a view, I know. He's not going to say it. He's got his arms folded. He's not going to go there. So it's worth thinking about. About at least 50% of EIAs in Western Australia have offsets on average. And so I think 3 out of the 4 case studies or 3 out of the 5, whatever it is for assignment 3 have them. So, they'll be they're just a big part of what you do. So let's leave it there. Any questions or comments? Any comments online? I haven't seen the chat. I can't see the chat. Anything coming up online? Anyone got a question online? Anyone in the room got a question about mitigation, offsets, and significance before that? No? Sure, Carla wants to say something about offsets. Go on, Carla.
I think I would like to hear about the difference between significant and acceptable when you go to offset after having results from what we can expect from mitigation hierarchy and offsetting nature positive. How do you define what's acceptable?
Right. So that is a very good question. IAIA have a guide, which I never give to you as a reading, a guide about, I think it's their guide on mitigation, or is their guide on significance? It's probably their guide on significance. And it defines significance as being about acceptable. which is wrong. It's just wrong. And so the International Association of Impact Assessment have this document that I believe expresses it wrongly. And I took it out of the training course for IAI when I was in charge of the training course and got rid of it to make sure it was right. Significance, something can be significant but acceptable, and something can be unacceptable and not non-significant. They're not the same thing at all. We'll get onto that in the next topic because we'll have a break now. We'll get onto that in the next topic and we talk about decision making. Yeah. So, and I got an example that sort of touches on that. But yeah, there's a relationship, but they're not the same thing. Yes. Let's leave it at that for the time being. I need to write a paper on that, but maybe you and I should write a paper on that. It's kind of hard to pinpoint. Yeah. All right, let's leave that there. Let's take a break. I will stop the recording and stop sharing, and we'll take a break and we'll come back at 4:10.